You can't be here. The voice cracked like a whip before I even turned around. I froze, a cardboard box pressed against my hip, the afternoon sun burning my neck. A man in a crisp polo and mirrored sunglasses stood at the edge of my driveway, red-faced, pointing as if I'd just climbed over his fence. "This is HOA property," he barked. "You're trespassing." For a second, I thought it was some kind of joke. Maybe a nosy neighbor being dramatic. I had moved to Maple Ridge Estates that morning, the moving truck still idling by the curb. But the man wasn't smiling. His jaw clenched as he walked closer, clipboard in hand like an officer issuing a citation. "Excuse me?" I said, setting the box down. "This is my house," he scoffed. "Not until the HOA approves it. Where's your registration letter?" I blinked, unsure if I'd misheard. "Registration letter? I bought the property last week. I don't even think this house is inside your HOA." He stepped onto the driveway, boots grinding the gravel. "Everything on this street belongs to Maple Ridge Estates. You can't move in without board clearance." His tone carried the same arrogance as a man used to being obeyed. I later learned his name, Richard Halpern, the self-proclaimed president of the Maple Ridge HOA. I tried to keep my composure, but my heart was pounding. I could feel the stairs, curtains shifting, blinds bending. A woman across the street whispered to someone on her porch. The whole neighborhood was watching, waiting for me to back down. "Sir," I said, forcing calm. "This home was sold to me by the county. I have the deed in my car. I don't owe anyone an explanation, least of all the HOA that manages your street," he cut in, smirking. "Wrong answer." He pulled out his phone. "You're refusing to identify yourself on HOA property. I'm calling the police." My stomach dropped. "You're calling the police? For what? Moving into my own house?" He didn't answer. He was already dialing. When the patrol car rolled up 10 minutes later, I could feel sweat prickling down my back. The officer stepped out, resting a hand on his belt. Rick greeted him like an old friend, pointing straight at me. "There she is, officer," he said, puffing up his chest. "Refusing to leave private HOA property." The officer turned to me, eyes narrowing. "Ma'am, can I see your proof of ownership?" I tried to explain, stumbling through words. "I just closed on this house 3 days ago. My closing paperwork is still in my car." "I'm not part of this HOA," Rick chuckled under his breath. "That's what they all say." I could feel the heat of humiliation rising in my chest. Tyler, my 8-year-old, peeked out the window of the moving truck, his little face twisted in confusion. The neighbors kept staring. No one said a word to help. I handed the officer my ID and gestured toward the car. "Please, I'll show you the deed. This is a mistake." But before I could move, Rick folded his arms, smirking like a man certain of victory. The officer looked at me for a long moment, then said slowly, "Ma'am, I need to see your deed. Now." And right then, with that one sentence, I realized my peaceful new beginning had just turned into a battlefield. The sound of my son laughing used to calm me. Now every knock on the door made my heart jump. It's strange how quickly a dream can sour. How something as simple as a home can turn into a place of tension and fear. When I first saw the little white house on Birchwood Lane, it felt like a fresh breath after years of suffocating. After the divorce, I told myself I'd find peace somewhere quiet, where Tyler could play outside without hearing arguments through thin apartment walls. Maple Ridge looked perfect. Manicured lawns, oak trees swaying in warm Texas wind, the faint hum of sprinklers at dawn. For the first week, I believed I'd made it. I spent mornings unpacking, brewing coffee while sunlight spilled through the kitchen window. Tyler rode his bike up and down the driveway, laughing every time the wheels hit a bump. The neighbors waved politely but didn't come close, and that was fine by me. I thought they were just private people. Not wary ones. But that calm didn't last. 2 days after my run-in with Rick, I woke to find a sheet of paper taped to my mailbox. At first, I assumed it was a delivery notice. But when I saw the words printed in bold, HOA Notice of Violation, my hands went cold. Apparently, my unauthorized driveway color violated the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association's architectural guidelines. I stared at the words for a full minute, trying to understand how a strip of plain gray concrete could possibly break a rule. I wasn't even a member of this HOA. At first, I laughed it off, figuring it was some clerical mistake. But that same afternoon, I caught sight of Rick again, standing on the sidewalk across the street, clipboard tucked under his arm. He wasn't even pretending to hide it this time, just watching me. His mirrored sunglasses caught the reflection of my house as he scribbled something down. That night, I called the county office, trying to verify what I'd been told, that my property wasn't inside the HOA's jurisdiction. The clerk confirmed it again. My house wasn't listed under Maple Ridge Estates. Still, the next morning, another envelope appeared. This one demanded I cease violations immediately, or face potential liens and penalties. I showed it to my next-door neighbor, Carol, an older woman who'd lived there for years. She frowned, glancing around nervously before whispering, "Rick's been like this for a while. He runs the HOA like it's his own army. People don't question him anymore." "Why not?" I asked. She shook her head. "Because the ones who did moved away." That night, I barely slept. Every little sound, the creak of a floorboard, the hum of the refrigerator, felt amplified. Around midnight, I saw headlights sweep across my living room wall, slowing right in front of my house. A car idled, then drove off. The next morning, the air smelled like wet grass and something sharp. Fresh paint. I stepped outside, heart pounding, and froze. A bright red sticker was plastered across my front window in bold block letters, "Property in violation." It was centered perfectly, right where everyone driving by could see. I stood there on my porch, barefoot and shaking, realizing that this wasn't about rules or property lines anymore. Someone wanted me gone, and Rick wasn't done yet. When I told Rick he had the wrong house, he leaned close and whispered, "We own this block. You'll pay, one way or another." His breath reeked of coffee and arrogance, and the way he said it wasn't a threat. It was a promise. For a moment, I stood frozen, clutching the handle of my mailbox, trying to make sense of the insanity. How could anyone own my home except me? That night, I couldn't eat. I sat at my kitchen table with the violation letters spread out in front of me, each one stamped with the Maple Ridge HOA seal like an official court document. They used words that made my stomach turn: non-compliance, financial penalties, legal enforcement. I'd worked so hard to buy this house. Every penny from my savings poured into it, and now a man I barely knew was threatening me with fines for rules that didn't apply to me. By morning, I decided to stop guessing and get real answers. Tyler was at school, so I drove straight to the county records office downtown. The building smelled faintly of old paper and lemon cleaner. Rows of filing cabinets stretched across the room like metal soldiers. A woman behind the counter, her glasses hanging from a chain, smiled politely. "Hi," I began, sliding one of the violation letters across the counter. "I just need to verify something. Can you check if this address is part of the Maple Ridge Estates HOA?" She typed for a moment, the clacking of keys echoing in the quiet office. Then she frowned slightly, scrolling through her screen. "No," she said at last. "You're not listed under that subdivision. Your lot ends right here." She pointed to a highlighted line on the map. "See this section? Maple Ridge starts 38 feet south of your property line. You're not in it." A wave of relief hit me so hard I nearly laughed. "So, I don't owe them anything? They can't fine me?" The clerk smiled. "They have no legal authority over you. But I'd keep these copies, just in case." She printed the plats and stamped them with the county seal before sliding them into a folder. Legal nugget. Always verify HOA boundaries at the county clerk's office. If your property isn't recorded under an HOA, they have zero enforcement. Rights? No fines, no dues, no power. Driving home, I rehearsed what I'd say to Rick. I'd imagined the look on his face when I handed him the official map. Proof, black and white, that he had no control over me. For the first time in days, I felt lighter. But that peace didn't last an hour. By the time I pulled into my driveway, there was another envelope tucked under my doormat, the same Maple Ridge seal. I tore it open, my hands shaking. This one was worse. It said my dues were now past due, and that failure to remit payment could result in further legal escalation. My stomach turned. He wasn't stopping. He was doubling down. Over the next week, the letters came almost daily. Some threatened late fees. Others hinted at potential liens. Each one angrier, more official looking than the last. Then one evening, a certified mail slip appeared on my door. My name in bold typed letters. No return address. Only a stamp that read Maple Ridge. Estates HOA. Inside, the heading chilled me to the bone. Final warning, immediate payment required. And for the first time, I realized Rick wasn't just playing HOA president. He was building a case against me. Sit down and shut up. Rick barked as I tried to speak. The entire board turned their eyes on me like a criminal, and for a moment, I almost did sit down. Not out of respect, but shock. I'd walked into that small beige community center thinking I was finally going to clear this mess up, armed with county maps and stamped plats that proved I didn't belong to Maple Ridge Estates. But from the second I stepped through the door, I knew this wasn't a meeting. It was a performance. Rick sat at the head of a long folding table, arms crossed, wearing that same smug smile I'd come to despise. Behind him, a banner read Maple Ridge HOA Board of Directors. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and every plastic chair in the room was filled with homeowners. I recognized a few, the neighbors who watched quietly from behind their blinds whenever Rick cornered me outside. When I tried to introduce myself, Rick slammed his gavel against the table. "You're not recognized to speak," he said, his voice booming over the tiny speaker system. I held up the folder in my hand. "I'm here because your HOA keeps harassing me. I don't live under your association. My property isn't within your jurisdiction." He smirked. "Ma'am, you live on Birchwood Lane. Everything on Birchwood is under Maple Ridge. If you're using our street, our sidewalks, our lighting, you're benefiting from HOA property." A few people nodded hesitantly, like children afraid to disagree with a teacher. My pulse quickened. "So you're saying I can't drive on the road I live on? You're saying you own public sidewalks?" Rick leaned back in his chair. "Don't twist my words. We maintain this neighborhood, and people like you think they can just waltz in and skip the rules. That's not how things work here." The room went silent. I could hear the air conditioner rattling against the wall. I tried again, more calmly this time. "Rick, I have county records right here. My property's outside your boundary. You have no authority to fine or threaten me." He let out a low chuckle and turned to the others. "See what I deal with? Everyone thinks they're special. Everyone thinks they're exempt." A woman on the board whispered something to him, but he waved her off. Another man shifted uncomfortably in his chair, eyes darting toward the floor. No one said a word in my defense. Legal nugget HOAs have no jurisdiction outside their legally recorded plats. Any enforcement or fines against non-members are void and can be considered harassment under state law. Rick grabbed the gavel again. "This meeting is for members only. Security." Two men wearing neon vests stood up from the back. Not real officers, just volunteers. Still, their presence made my chest tighten. "Escort her out," Rick ordered, pretending not to look at me. "She's disrupting official business." I clutched my folder tighter, forcing a bitter smile. "You can throw me out, Rick, but the law's already on my side." He didn't respond, only tapped his gavel once more and turned to the next agenda item as if I'd vanished. The room moved on without me, a crowd of obedient faces nodding to the sound of one man's voice. As I reached the door, one of the board members, a quiet woman with gray streaks in her hair, slipped something into my hand. A folded note. I didn't open it until I was outside under the parking lot light. Scrawled in shaky handwriting were 5 words that made my heart skip. "He's done this before." I opened the file and froze. My address was scribbled onto a map, added by hand. The ink looked rushed, uneven, like someone had tried to make it blend in with the printed streets. But it didn't. It stuck out like a wound, a lie in black marker, bold and sloppy. That discovery didn't happen by chance. A week after the HOA meeting, I got a call from a woman named Linda Hayes. Her voice was low, careful, the kind of tone people use when they've been burned before. "I used to live in Maple Ridge," she said. "Rick did the same thing to me. Forced me to pay dues I didn't owe. He's been expanding the HOA lines for years." We met at a small diner off the highway, away from prying eyes. Linda looked tired, older than her years, her nails bitten down to the quick. She slid a worn envelope across the table. Inside were photocopies of HOA records, the kind you could only get from someone who'd been digging for a while. "Where did you get these?" I asked. "Public filings," she said. "County archives. I've been keeping track since I left. You'd be surprised how many fake amendments are buried in those drawers." That night, I drove us both to the county building. It was nearly empty, fluorescent lights buzzing as the clerk signed us in. We combed through drawer after drawer of plats, amendments, and subdivision filings. Most looked legitimate, until we reached one stamped Maple Ridge Extension B. That's where my stomach dropped. My address was listed there, handwritten next to a parcel number, dated just 2 months before I bought the house. The amendment wasn't stamped by the county clerk. No official signature. No approval code. Just an unfiled piece of paper pretending to be law. "This is it," Linda whispered. "This is how he gets away with it. He files copies internally, makes it look official, then bullies people until they pay. Legal nugget HOA amendments or expansions must be officially recorded and approved by the county clerk to be valid. Any internal or unapproved documents have no legal standing." I stared at that map until my eyes blurred. How many families had Rick tricked with this same tactic? How many people had sold their homes or emptied their savings just to make him stop harassing them? Linda leaned back, her expression tight. "You should be careful. Rick's not just some crank with a clipboard. He's got friends, city inspectors, maybe even someone in the clerk's office. That's how he's kept this up for years." The thought made my skin crawl. If she was right, this wasn't just HOA harassment. It was corruption, a network of people helping him hold control over anyone unlucky enough to live nearby. I made copies of everything: the fake amendment, the plat maps, the proof that my property line fell outside his jurisdiction. I tucked them into a folder and locked it in my desk when I got home. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had leverage. Something solid. But that feeling didn't last long. Around midnight, I went to take the trash out. The night was still, except for the low hum of a distant engine. Then I saw it, the black SUV parked across the street, lights off, engine running. Rick's SUV. He wasn't even pretending to hide anymore. He was watching. Flashlights beamed through my curtains. A voice shouted, "Community Patrol, step outside." For a moment, I couldn't move. My pulse hammered in my ears as I peeked through the blinds. 2 men in dark jackets stood near my porch, scanning my yard with handheld lights. Their pickup truck idled at the curb, an orange magnetic decal on the door. Maple Ridge Community Patrol. It was just after 11 at night. Tyler was asleep upstairs, and I was halfway through an email to the county attorney when I heard them pull up. Now, watching those men aim their flashlights at my windows, something in me snapped. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and stepped onto the porch. "Can I help you?" I called out, keeping my voice steady. The taller man turned, squinting under my porch light. "Evening, ma'am." "HOA patrol. Just conducting a routine inspection." I laughed in disbelief. "Routine inspection? At 11 o'clock at night?" He shifted awkwardly. "We've had reports of non-compliance." "From who?" I interrupted. "Rick Halpern?" They didn't answer. The shorter one raised his camera and started snapping photos of my flower beds, my mailbox, even my car. I stepped forward. "You're trespassing. This is private property." The tall one shrugged. "We're authorized by the board." "No," I said firmly. You're authorized by Rick and he doesn't have jurisdiction here. You have 60 seconds to leave before I call the police." They exchanged looks. The taller man hesitated, then muttered, "Fine," and motioned for the other to leave. Their truck rolled away slowly, headlights off until they turned the corner. I stood there for a long time after they left, my breath sharp in the cold night air. When I finally went back inside, my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I saved the video in 3 different folders just in case. The next morning, I filed a report at the local police station. The officer behind the counter listened with half interest, flipping through my written statement. When I finished, he sighed. "Ma'am, this sounds like a civil dispute. We don't get involved in HOA matters." "Civil dispute?" I repeated. "They were on my property, at night, taking pictures of my house." He shrugged. "If they didn't break anything, there's not much we can do." I left feeling smaller than I had in months. That night, Tyler refused to go outside. He'd seen the flashlights too. When he asked, "Mom, are they coming back?" I didn't know how to answer, so I did the only thing I could think of. I started documenting everything. I bought 2 security cameras and mounted them on the corners of the house. Every letter from Rick went into a labeled folder. Every encounter, I filmed. But no amount of preparation could stop the dread that lingered. I found myself peeking through the blinds every hour, waiting for another engine to idle outside. Even the dog down the street barking at night made my heart skip. A few evenings later, just as the sun dipped low, there was a knock on the door. The sound was sharp, official. I opened it to find a uniformed city officer standing on my porch, clipboard in hand. "Ma'am," he said, glancing at the folder he carried, "I'm here to deliver a notice." He handed me an envelope stamped with the city seal. The heading read, "Trespassing Citation, filed by Maple Ridge HOA." My breath caught. Rick had actually done it. He'd turned my home into a crime scene. I stood on the grass and drew my own boundary line with spray paint. The real one. The hiss of the paint can cut through the quiet morning air as I traced the surveyor's bright orange markers that ran across my yard like battle lines. The smell of paint mixed with the dew, sharp and metallic, but it felt empowering. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that the land I stood on was mine. A week earlier, after receiving that absurd trespassing citation, I'd hired a professional land surveyor named Ben Torres. He was a soft-spoken man with sunburned skin and an old truck full of measuring poles and tripods. The morning he arrived, Tyler watched from the porch as Ben set up his gear with quiet precision. "I've seen this kind of thing before," Ben said, glancing toward Rick's house down the street. "HOA presidents who think their map trumps the county's. Don't worry, we'll settle this." He spent the whole afternoon walking the perimeter, planting bright orange stakes where my property ended and public land began. When he finally packed up, he handed me a printed report and smiled. "You're in the clear. Your home sits completely outside the Maple Ridge HOA boundary by more than 30 feet. Their claim doesn't hold water." It felt like someone had lifted a weight off my chest. Finally, hard evidence, something that couldn't be twisted or denied. Legal nugget in boundary disputes. Official survey maps legally overrule HOA plats or internal amendments. Only a licensed surveyor's findings can determine true property lines. That evening, I sat down with my friend Melissa, an attorney I knew from my freelance work, and we drafted a cease and desist letter. It was clean, professional, and direct. The Maple Ridge HOA has no legal jurisdiction over the property located at 214 Birchwood Lane. Any further action will constitute harassment. We mailed it by certified delivery to Rick's address, and I waited. 2 days later, I woke to find new signs staked along the edge of my yard. Large white boards with red letters that read, "HOA property, keep out." They were nailed into the grass, just inches from the orange survey stakes, as if Rick were mocking me. I marched outside, camera in hand, and recorded every one of them. The sight of those signs made my stomach churn. They weren't just warnings. They were meant to humiliate me. Anyone driving by would think I was the trespasser, not the victim. Later that afternoon, while I was on the phone with Melissa, a neighbor stopped by. He was an older man named Frank who'd lived on Birchwood for 20 years. He glanced at the signs and shook his head. "He's done this before," he muttered. "Scared off two families at the far end of the street. You're the first to stand your ground." "Then I'm not moving an inch," I said. But that night, as I tucked Tyler into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Rick was getting desperate. Every act of defiance from me only seemed to fuel his obsession. The next morning, the sound of footsteps on my porch pulled me from sleep. I opened the door to find a man in a suit holding a clipboard. He spoke with the flat tone of someone who'd said the same words 100 times before. "Ms. Carter, you've been served." He handed me a thick envelope stamped County Court of Texas. My heart sank as I read the first line. Notice of civil action. Plaintiff, Maple Ridge, HOA versus defendant, Emily Carter. Claim, encroachment. Rick wasn't just harassing me anymore. He was taking me to court. When I walked into that courtroom, Rick smirked, like he was about to bury me under his rules. He sat at the plaintiff's table in a crisp navy suit, his hair slicked back, a thick binder stacked in front of him. I could feel his confidence radiating across the room, the kind that comes from years of getting away with intimidation. Behind him sat two of his board members, whispering like loyal soldiers ready to witness another victory for their king. I, on the other hand, had nothing but a worn manila folder and the truth. My palms were damp as I clutched the folder tighter, feeling the texture of the stamped county plats through the paper. My heart hammered, but I reminded myself, I've faced worse. This man doesn't own me. The courtroom itself was small, a county-level civil court with wood-paneled walls, faded flags, and a single humming ceiling fan. The judge, a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes, looked over the paperwork with the weariness of someone who'd seen every kind of nonsense imaginable. "All right," she said, glancing first at Rick's lawyer. "Maple Ridge Estates versus Emily Carter. Claim of property encroachment. Counsel, proceed." Rick's attorney, a man named Paul Jennings, stood and straightened his tie. "Your Honor, this case is simple. The defendant, Ms. Carter, resides on a parcel of land that directly borders Maple Ridge Estates. The HOA maintains the common area in front of her property, and she has repeatedly used and benefited from HOA-managed facilities, lighting, sidewalk, and landscaping, without paying dues or obtaining approval." He turned toward me briefly, smiling like he was explaining something to a child. "In essence, Your Honor, she is enjoying the privileges of Maple Ridge membership while refusing to comply with its obligations." I could feel heat rising in my cheeks, but I didn't move. The judge glanced at me before turning back to him. "And you're asserting that her property falls under your HOA's authority?" "Yes, Your Honor," he replied. "By extension of the Maple Ridge HOA expansion filed in late 2022. "Filed with the county clerk?" she asked. There was a pause. Rick's lawyer cleared his throat. "It was recorded internally and approved by the HOA board as permitted under our bylaws." That's when I spoke up. My voice trembled at first, but steadied with every word. "Your Honor, may I present Exhibit A? Official county survey maps and plats showing my property lies 38 feet outside the Maple Ridge HOA boundary." I handed the documents to the clerk, who passed them up to the bench. The judge flipped through them, her brow furrowing. "These are certified," she said, glancing toward me. "Obtained from the county?" "Yes, ma'am," I replied. "Stamped, signed, and verified by the county clerk's office." The so-called expansion map they're using wasn't filed. It was altered. My address was added by hand. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Rick shifted in his seat, tapping his pen against the table. The judge turned back to his attorney. "Counsel, do you have an official, recorded plat map that includes the defendant's property?" Jennings hesitated, flipping through his binder. "We have the board-approved version." "Recorded with the county?" she interrupted. He hesitated again. "No, Your Honor. The clerk's office delayed." "That's not how this works," she said sharply. An HOA's jurisdiction doesn't extend beyond its recorded plat. Period. If it's not filed, it's not enforceable. I watched Rick's smirk fade, his jaw tightening as the judge continued. In fact, I'm seeing multiple references here to dues, fines, and penalties sent to the defendant. Were those issued under this unfiled map? Rick finally spoke, his voice louder than it needed to be. We operate in good faith. The board voted unanimously on the extension. The judge leaned forward, unamused. Good faith doesn't override state law, Mr. Halpern. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked unsure, like the ground beneath his control was finally cracking. I took a deep breath. Your Honor, I've been harassed for months. My property labeled in violation. False trespassing claims, even nighttime patrols. I've documented everything. I slid another folder across the table. Photos, letters, video stills. The judge skimmed a few pages, then sighed. This is concerning. She turned to Rick's attorney. Counsel, I'm ordering a review. I want all Maple Ridge filings, financial records, and HOA correspondence turned over to the county clerk's office within 10 business days. Jennings's face went pale. Rick muttered something under his breath, his fingers gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. The judge rapped her gavel once. Until that review is complete, this case is suspended. The court will determine whether Maple Ridge Estates has been operating within its legal boundaries. The sound of that gavel felt like a thunderclap. Not just because I'd won that day, but because something bigger had just been set in motion. As I walked out of the courtroom, I glanced back one last time. Rick was still seated, staring at me with pure hatred burning behind his eyes. He'd tried to bury me under his rules, but now, the law was coming for him. It started with one whisper. Then the whole street turned against him. For months, everyone in Maple Ridge had lived under Rick's shadow, afraid to question, afraid to speak, afraid to become the next target of his temper. But after the court hearing, something shifted. People began to realize the man barking orders at them might not have the authority he pretended to. It began quietly. Mrs. Patel from 2 houses down stopped me while I was bringing in groceries. She lowered her voice like we were plotting a crime. I heard what happened in court, she said. Is it true the judge ordered an investigation? I nodded and she exhaled, half relieved, half nervous. You're brave, Emily. He fined me for painting my shutters the wrong shade of beige. I paid because I was scared he'd ruin my credit. I wish I'd done what you did. Word spread fast after that. By the end of the week, people were talking in driveways, comparing stories of harassment, fake violations, illegal fines, anonymous complaints that somehow always led back to Rick. Then Linda took it further. She started a petition calling for Rick's removal as HOA president. It was bold, dangerous even, but she didn't care. He's been unchecked too long, she told me over coffee. If we wait for the county to finish investigating, he'll just destroy the evidence first. She went door to door, clipboard in hand, collecting signatures. Some homeowners refused, still too afraid, but many signed, quietly, quickly, sometimes with trembling hands. By the weekend, she had over 40 names. That's when things got ugly. One morning, I woke to the sound of splintering wood. I ran outside and saw my fence slashed open. Panels broken, nails scattered across the grass. My security camera was still recording, the red light blinking like an accusation. Later, when I reviewed the footage, I saw him, Rick plain as day, flashlight in hand, ripping through my fence like it was nothing. I called the police again. This time, I had evidence. The officer took my statement and downloaded the footage, promising to attach it to the county's case file. This will help, he said. You're not the only one who's complained. That same afternoon, a local news van pulled up to my house. A reporter stepped out, microphone in hand. Miss Carter, we're doing a segment on HOA overreach. We heard your story might be interesting. I didn't want to be on camera. Not at first. I'd already endured enough unwanted attention. But then I thought about Tyler, about all the people Rick had silenced, and I said yes. We filmed the interview on my porch. I showed them the letters, the fake plats, the video of him destroying my fence. By the next morning, the story was on local television. HOA president accused of forgery and harassment. Neighbors gathered outside, murmuring as the broadcast replayed. Rick's SUV wasn't parked in its usual spot that day. For the first time, the street felt lighter, freer, like the neighborhood itself had started to breathe again. But just as I began to think it was over, my phone rang. It was Linda. Her voice was shaking. "Emily," she said, whispering, "you need to call the county. He's burning papers in his garage. I can see the smoke from my window." I froze, gripping the phone. "The investigators are coming," she added, her voice breaking. "He's trying to destroy everything." I ran to the window, and sure enough, a thin trail of smoke curled into the gray evening sky. Rick wasn't surrendering. He was panicking. And that meant the truth was about to come out. Sirens echoed down the street as Rick's empire went up in smoke. Literally. The flashing lights cut through the morning fog, painting the neat row of houses in red and blue. From my porch, I could see the swarm of county vehicles surrounding the Maple Ridge HOA office, a small, one-story building Rick had once called the headquarters of excellence. Now it looked like the center of a crime scene. It started just after dawn. I'd been pouring coffee when the rumble of engines outside made me look up. 2 black SUVs rolled past, followed by a police cruiser and a white county van marked Investigations Division. Neighbors stepped out in their robes, craning their necks. For the first time, no one was whispering. Everyone wanted to see. By the time I walked to the end of my driveway, officers were already carrying boxes out of the building. Thick binders, computer towers, stacks of unfiled paperwork. The air smelled faintly of burnt paper. Linda hadn't been exaggerating when she'd said Rick was burning things the night before. Charred fragments still clung to the edge of a trash barrel behind the office, half-melted plastic smoking under the morning sun. I spotted Rick on the curb, his perfect composure finally cracked. His hair was a mess, his shirt half untucked, hands fidgeting as he tried to talk over the lead investigator. The man didn't even look at him. He just kept pointing at the pile of seized evidence. Neighbors gathered in clusters, murmuring, "I heard they found fake maps. Someone said he's been stealing HOA dues. Didn't he fine that woman for having a red door?" That last one stung, because that woman was me. I felt Linda come up beside me. "He's finished," she whispered. Her voice was trembling, but her smile was the first genuine one I'd seen on this street. Within the hour, officers carried out a final box sealed with red evidence tape. The investigator turned to the nearest reporter and confirmed what everyone had been speculating. Preliminary findings indicate falsified property documents and potential embezzlement of HOA funds. Legal nugget HOA fraud and forgery are considered felony offenses under state law, punishable by fines, restitution, and imprisonment. Any board official found fabricating plats or stealing funds faces both criminal and civil penalties. Rick tried to shout something as they cuffed him, but his words were drowned by the sound of the crowd. For months, he'd ruled with threats and letters. Now, those same people were watching him being led away, whispering with disbelief and relief. One woman clapped softly. Another called out, "Guess you're not above the law after all, Rick." The sound grew, hesitant at first, then louder. A ripple of applause spreading down the street. He turned once, meeting my eyes. There was no smugness left, only panic. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. As they put him in the back of the cruiser, the reporter from the local station spotted me on my porch. Microphone in hand, she jogged over, her cameraman following close behind. "Ms. Carter," she called. "You were the first to challenge him, right? The one who stood up to the HOA?" I hesitated, still processing what I was seeing. The flashing lights, the murmuring neighbors, the sight of Rick Halpern finally being taken away. "Yes," I said quietly. "I just wanted to be left alone. That's all." The reporter nodded, then asked the question that caught me off guard. "How did you know you were right all along?" For a second, I couldn't answer. Behind her, I could see Tyler waving from the porch, his face bright for the first time in months. I finally looked back at the reporter and said, "Because the truth doesn't need permission to exist." The camera light blinked red, recording everything. The sirens, the ashes, the end of Rick's reign. And for the first time since moving to Maple Ridge, I actually believed peace might last. The same cop who once demanded my deed now handed Rick his arrest warrant. I'll never forget the look on his face, not the officer's, but Rick's. The man who'd strutted around the neighborhood for years, barking orders and waving citations like weapons, stood on his porch in a wrinkled polo shirt, blinking under the flashing red lights. The officer read the charges in a calm, steady voice: fraud, harassment, falsification of public documents, and obstruction of a county investigation. Rick didn't say a word. For the first time, his mouth wasn't running ahead of the law. Neighbors lined the sidewalks, watching in silence. Some filmed on their phones, others just stared, unsure whether to clap or look away. I stood across the street, my arms folded, the autumn air cool against my skin. For months, that man had made my life a waking nightmare, calling me a trespasser, sending men to my house, suing me for living on my own land. Now the law was doing what it should have done all along. When the cruiser finally pulled away, taking Rick with it, I felt the tension drain from my body. My knees nearly gave out. Linda caught my arm before I stumbled. "It's over," she whispered. "You did it." But it wasn't just me. It was every homeowner who'd been afraid to speak, every family who'd written checks just to avoid his wrath, every quiet neighbor who'd peeked through blinds and whispered, "I hope someone stops him." Together, we'd cracked his empire open. One file, one hearing, one act of defiance at a time. A week later, I received an envelope from the county courthouse. My stomach twisted as I opened it, half expecting another summons, another cruel surprise. Instead, it was the opposite. Case dismissed with prejudice. Those 4 words might not mean much to most people, but to me they were everything. It meant I was fully cleared. The lawsuit couldn't be refiled. Not by Rick, not by anyone. The accusations of trespassing, encroachment, and HOA violations were gone for good. I didn't cry. I just stood there in the kitchen, holding the paper against my chest, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant laughter of my son outside. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for the next letter, the next knock, the next threat. A few days after the dismissal, the county posted its official ruling. Maple Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, dissolved effective immediately. I drove by the old HOA office the next morning. The sign had already been taken down, the windows empty. The place looked small now, just a faded building with ghosts of power that never truly existed. Rick's arrest made the local news again. The anchor's voice was even, detached, but the words hit hard. Investigators confirmed falsified HOA boundary documents, illegal collection of dues, and misappropriation of community funds exceeding $100,000. $100,000. He'd built his little empire on stolen money and fake maps. That night, Tyler and I sat on the porch. The cicadas sang softly from the trees, and the air smelled like rain. For months, every sound outside had sent my nerves on edge, but now it all felt different, gentler, normal. Tyler leaned his head against my shoulder. "Mom," he said quietly, "does that mean he's gone for good?" I smiled, brushing his hair from his forehead. "Yeah, sweetheart, he's gone." He nodded, his eyes heavy with sleep. "Good," he murmured. "I can sleep now." I sat there for a long time after he went to bed, just listening. No engines idling outside, no footsteps on the porch, no knocks in the night. It was the kind of silence I used to pray for. Fear had become strength. I'd been forced to learn laws, fight in court, face down a man who thought intimidation was power. And in the end, it wasn't the shouting or the threats that won. It was the truth, documented and undeniable. A few days later, as I was trimming the front hedges, a moving truck pulled up next door. A young couple stepped out, excited, nervous. just like I'd been that first day. The man waved and smiled. "Hi there. We just closed on the house. Can you tell us how strict the HOA is around here?" For a second, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I wiped my hands on my jeans, took a deep breath, and said, "Well, about that. I was called a trespasser, but I was just a mother protecting her home. That's what it all came down to. Not power, not rules, not bylaws or maps. Just a woman and her son, standing their ground against people who thought they could take what wasn't theirs." When all this began, I thought HOAs were harmless, groups of volunteers trimming lawns and handing out newsletters. I had no idea they could twist laws, misuse authority, and turn neighbors into enemies. I didn't know that one man's obsession with control could nearly cost me my home, my safety, and my peace of mind. Now, months later, the house feels alive again. The grass is green where the keep out signs once stood. Tyler's laughter fills the backyard. Bouncing off the fence, Rick tried to destroy. And every time the mail truck drives by, I don't flinch. That alone feels like victory. But victory came with lessons. Lessons I wish someone had told me before all this started. So, if you're watching this, if you've ever had that pit in your stomach because someone in power decided to make you their target, listen carefully. The first thing I learned is this: always know your boundaries, legally and literally. Don't just take your HOA's word for it. Go to the county clerk's office. Request your plat map, your deed, your survey report. Those documents are your armor. Without them, you're walking blind. The second lesson: document everything. Every letter, every voicemail, every conversation. Write it down. I can't tell you how many times Rick tried to twist my words, how often he'd send warnings that disappeared conveniently when questioned. It was my paper trail that saved me. Not emotion, not outrage, but proof. And third, you have more power than you think. HOAs thrive on fear. They make you believe you're powerless, that resistance will cost you more than compliance. That's what Rick counted on. But when I refused to back down, his entire web of lies started to unravel. I used to think standing up for yourself meant yelling louder. Now I know it means standing still, refusing to be moved when someone else tries to rewrite your reality. The county's ruling changed everything for Maple Ridge. After the dissolution, the neighborhood started healing. Without Rick breathing down everyone's neck, people began to talk again. Kids played outside. Porches were decorated however folks wanted. Red doors, pink flowers, even a bright blue mailbox that would have driven Rick insane. It was as if the street was reclaiming itself, one color at a time. Linda still comes by for coffee once a week. She says it feels strange not seeing HOA notices in her mailbox anymore. "It's too quiet," she jokes, though I can tell she's still processing her own battles. We both are. You don't go through something like this and walk away unchanged. Sometimes at night I sit on the porch and think about how easily it could have gone differently. If I'd ignored the letters, if I'd given in, Rick would still be running that neighborhood, still preying on fear. I tell you this not as some legal expert, but as someone who had to learn the hard way. Don't let anyone, not a neighbor, not an HOA, not even a supposed authority, make you doubt what's rightfully yours. The law doesn't belong to the loudest person in the room. It belongs to the one who's willing to stand on truth and hold their ground. What about you? Has anyone ever tried to intimidate you with fake rules, forged threats, or bullying tactics? What would you do if your HOA tried this? Drop your story below. I want to hear it, because silence protects people like Rick, and telling your story takes that power back. And if you ever find yourself holding a letter with words like violation notice or trespassing citation, remember this: letters aren't laws, signatures aren't truth, and fear isn't ownership. These days, peace looks different to me. It's not the absence of conflict. It's the ability to breathe freely on land that no one else can claim. It's my son sleeping soundly in his room, the porch light glowing soft over the yard, the sound of cicadas in the trees instead of tires crunching on gravel outside. Still, there's a part of me that stays alert, Not paranoid, just aware. Because power, once lost, doesn't always stay gone. This morning, when I checked the mail, I found a thick envelope. No return address. Just my name, typed in neat block letters. Inside, a single sheet of paper. The letterhead read, Halpern and Associates Law Firm. Under it, one line. Regarding prior civil matters, please contact our office. I stared at it for a long time, the cicadas humming louder in the distance. Was it over? Or was this the start of something new? Next week, I'll tell you about the HOA that tried to bulldoze a veteran's garden. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that injustice doesn't die quietly.